Have you ever been scrolling through the news, maybe seen headlines about immigration, temporary workers, and just wondered, how does this actually affect me? Or maybe you know someone, and maybe it's you, who's really struggled finding it, like that first job, right? And you start wondering, well, who is actually doing these jobs? It's really complex, isn't it? Because look, Canada's economy, it relies pretty heavily on foreign workers. But then there's this huge debate going on about, well, what's the real impact on jobs, wages, even, our society itself? Okay, so let's unpack this a bit. Today, we're really going to dive deep into Canada's Temporary Foreign Worker Program, the TFW program, and also the International Student Program. We've gathered, well, quite a stack of sources for you, everything from political statements, UN reports, academic studies, and some really quite powerful stories from people on the ground. Our goal here, for you listening, is to try and sift through all that, cut through some of the noise. We want you to come away with a clearer picture. So our mission is for you to really get the core arguments for and against these programs, to understand the real-world effects, and maybe why this whole thing has become such a hot topic lately. We'll look at who wants reform, who's defending the status quo, and importantly, what the actual data seems to show.
Yeah, and it's fascinating just how many different angles there are and how quickly they seem to clash. You've got on one side some pretty strong political voices pushing for big changes, maybe even getting rid of the TFW program altogether. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, for instance, he's been quite clear. He says the program is driving down wages and, quote, shutting young people out of jobs because it's flooding the market with cheap labor, in his words.
And that's not just a federal thing, is it? We're seeing similar concerns provincially, too. BC Premier David Eby, he's linked the TFW program to high youth unemployment as well. It feels like a widespread concern. Our sources also pointed to Rudyard Griffiths and Sean Spear from The Hub. Their take is that the TFW program is actively suppressing wages and essentially pricing prospective Canadian workers out of the job market. They even called it a corporate subsidy. Pretty strong language.
Very strong. And it lines up with why organized labor generally isn't a fan of the program, those same wage depression concerns. And we even saw some anecdotal stuff, right? Like a comment about someone's son being laid off because a refugee worker's wages were subsidized. So there's this feeling, this perception that entry-level spots for, say, high school kids or seniors are being taken.
Okay, so that's one side. The political noise, the concerns about wages, about jobs being displaced. But then you dig into the actual policy, and someone like immigration lawyer Mark Holtwood presents a different view. He points out the TFW program is designed specifically not to lower wages. Employers supposedly have to prove no Canadian is available, and they must pay the prevailing wage rate, ONF. So the rules say it shouldn't hurt Canadian wages. What's going wrong then? Is it enforcement?
Right.
Or something else?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It really shows the tension between, what a policy intends and what actually happens on the ground. The design might have safeguards, sure, but when you look at the scale, the complexity, well, things can go sideways. Gaps appear. Interestingly, Holf, and also a Desjardins report we looked at, they suggest maybe the real issue for young Canadians finding jobs isn't primarily the TFW program itself. It might actually be more connected to international students. They point to the, quote, sheer volume of students getting open work permits after graduation. And the idea is maybe they are more willing to take minimum wage jobs and there's, quote, no check and balance on it. So it kind of shifts the focus, suggesting another big pool of temporary labor is impacting that entry-level market.
That is a different angle. So while the public debate often lasers in on TFWs, there are some sources saying we might be barking up the wrong tree when we talk about youth unemployment.
Well, it's definitely another factor to weigh. Then you have Fabien Lange, an economics prof at McGill. He adds another layer saying high youth unemployment is, quote, primarily a business cycle phenomenon. Yeah. He basically sees youth employment figures as a kind of canary in the coal mine during downturns, suggesting it's more about the big economic picture than blaming TFW specifically. Plus, some sources argue, look, TFWs often do jobs that unemployed Canadians, say age 25, 54, just don't want to do. Farm labor, fast food, car washes, that kind of manual work. Filling gaps, essentially.
It's easy to get lost in the policy and the economics, the numbers, but then you encounter these reports and the human side of this really jumps out.
Yeah.
As we went through the sources, this much darker story started to emerge about exploitation. It really makes you stop and think. I mean, the UN Special Rapporteur on Contemporary Forms of Slavery, Tomoya Obokata, he described Canada's system, especially the employer-specific, closed work permits for temporary workers as a breeding ground for contemporary forms of slavery. I mean, that's incredibly powerful language.
Yeah, it really is. And it highlights a deep systemic problem baked into the structure of the program. Because when a worker's legal status, their right to be in the country, is tied directly to one specific employer, well, that creates a huge power imbalance. Imagine living with that constant threat of deportation, feeling scared, knowing you can't easily access unions or health care or even just information about your basic rights. It leaves workers incredibly vulnerable.
And we saw some really tough examples of that, like the story of Edgar Mendoza. He was an undocumented construction worker, got injured on the job, and his boss just abandoned him, left him with $14,000 in hospital bills and unable to work properly. And his quote, it really stuck with me. These are jobs that Canadians don't want to do, so we do the dirty jobs, right? It's us who support the construction field. But we also read about awful living conditions, housing owned by the employer, which gives them even more control. And that statistic, new immigrants facing twice the risk of workplace injury compared to non-immigrants. That's disturbing.
And it's not just a few bad apples, apparently. Advocates like Syed Hassan and Chris Ramsaroop, they're saying permanent resident status is absolutely essential for these workers to even access basic rights. They argue the current system is, quote, rotten to the core. Groups like the Immigrant Workers Center, the IWCCTI, they're calling for scrapping the closed permit system entirely and for regularization, basically, giving legal status and protection to undocumented immigrants so they're not trapped in that vulnerability.
And this isn't just happening in one specific industry, right?
No, definitely not. The sources suggest the biggest groups facing really severe exploitation are often in sectors like agriculture, fisheries, domestic work, construction, and care work. Often physically tough jobs or work that's, not always valued highly by society, but absolutely essential. It really underscores this ethical balancing act Canada is trying to manage, maybe struggling to manage between economic needs and fundamental human rights.
Okay, so putting aside the exploitation for a moment, which is obviously critical, what about the broader economy? Despite all these serious issues, the sources do stress that the TFW program is important for filling labor gaps in agriculture, food service, healthcare, construction key areas. Without these workers, apparently, we could see real impacts, like food prices going up or major delays in building homes. Even Mark Carney, former Bank of Canada governor, noted that business leaders often put access to foreign workers high on their priority list, right after tariffs. That says something.
Yeah, stepping back to the bigger picture, temporary residents contribute a lot economically. We're talking about roughly 2 million temporary residents filling jobs that are otherwise unfilled, and migration overall. Estimates suggest it drives somewhere between 50% and even 75% of Canada's GDP growth. Syed Hassan warned pretty directly that cutting immigration could actually shrink the economy and make affordability worse, not better. And RBC even projected a potential, $50 billion federal budget shortfall over 5 years because of falling immigration rates. But then there's that older research that adds a wrinkle, that 2012 Simon Fraser University study. It found that expanding the TFW program into low-skilled jobs and making it easier to hire actually helped keep regional unemployment differences wider than they might have been otherwise, basically by preventing wages from adjusting naturally and stopping workers from moving internally to where jobs were. The study flat out suggested the pricing of low-skilled TFW has been set too low.
That's a really fascinating counterpoint. The program might actually be stopping our own labor market from finding its balance naturally. But you mentioned another angle earlier. It's this other big source of temporary labor. Let's pivot now to the international student program. It's related, but yeah, a distinct part of this whole conversation.
Absolutely. And it's a huge economic engine, especially for our colleges and universities. International students pay way, way higher tuition fees, like often over $10,000 a semester compared to maybe $2,000 for a domestic student. That money is critical. It funds institutions, adds class spaces, hires staff, things that benefit Canadian students too, often. Plus, they spend billions off campus on living expenses, shopping, consumer spending. And let's not forget, they're a source of highly educated graduates for Canadian companies, especially in fields like science, engineering, medicine, really important areas.
But the recent government caps on study permits have caused some waves, right? Nearly 90,000 fewer permits issued in the first half of 2025 compared to the year before. That's a big drop. And the impact. Over 5,000 jobs cut in higher education already, mainly Ontario, BC, Quebec. Kwantlen College, for example, expecting like a $5–10 million revenue hit. Across Canada, the total tuition loss is estimated at over $1 billion. $1 billion! Plus all that off-campus spending businesses are now missing. It's significant.
It is significant. But to be fair, there were criticisms before the caps too. You've heard complaints about international students maybe contributing to crowded classes or pressure on housing like apartment shortages and high rents. And some worried that institutions were maybe focusing too much on them as a cash grab, potentially leading to, lower quality education or becoming degree mills. So there were definitely growing pains with the rapid expansion.
Which brings us right back to that housing issue. It seems connected to everything. The federal government has explicitly said reducing immigration will help ease housing demand. But is it really that straightforward? Is immigration the main villain in the housing crisis story?
Most experts we looked at say no, not really. People like Morley Gunderson and Wendy Cook here were pretty clear. They argue immigrants are often being scapegoated for the housing crisis. They called it short-sighted. And they pointed out this often affects visible minorities, which adds another sensitive layer. It's crucial to separate perception from the deeper issues, because the real drivers of the housing crisis are systemic. We're talking about housing being treated like an investment, a commodity at the financialization piece, plus a massive shortage of affordable housing, slow building timelines, interest rate swings, NIMBism, that not in my backyard thing, stopping new construction, and just a construction sector that hasn't been able to keep pace for years.
Okay, so this leads to that almost paradoxical point you touched on earlier, which really made me think. The idea that cutting immigration to help housing could actually make the housing supply problem worse. How does that work?
Exactly. It sounds counterintuitive, right? But Canada's construction industry relies heavily on immigrants and temporary foreign workers to actually build the houses we need. The data showed something like a tenfold increase in temporary residents working in construction between 2001 and 2021, nationwide. So here's the bind. If you cut overall immigration numbers but don't figure out how to get more construction workers, you risk slowing down home building even further, which just makes the supply shortage worse. It's a real policy dilemma. And it's probably why construction workers were mostly exempted from the recent TFW cuts. The government recognized we need them. Meyer Semiatiki also pointed out that our points-based immigration system traditionally hasn't given enough weight to trade skills, favoring university degrees over the very skills we desperately need, like in construction.
Wow. That really does tie so many threads together. And it seems to signal a bigger shift happening in Canada, doesn't it? Our sources talked about a fracturing of the consensus on immigration. For decades, there was broad agreement on high levels of permanent immigration, people coming here to become citizens. That agreement seems, well, shaky now.
It definitely seems that way. The polling data shows a real split. On scrapping the TFW program entirely, Canadians are divided. Roughly 40% support getting rid of it, 30% are opposed. Not exactly a unified voice. But dig deeper, and you see patterns. Conservative voters tend to favor eliminating it much more. Among liberal voters, though, there's a fault line. Often generational older voters more opposed to scrapping it, younger voters more supportive. This makes it, politically speaking, a really powerful wedge issue, something parties can use to draw distinctions. And the current government, Trudeau's government, is reviewing the TFW program and the whole immigration system with the stated goal of reducing immigration as a share of the population.
So, with all this complexity, all these competing pressures, what's the main advice coming from the experts and advocates we looked at?
The most consistent message is a strong warning against scapegoating. Avoid blaming immigrants or temporary workers for complex problems like housing or unemployment. There's a real concern this can fuel racism and xenophobia. Instead, many are calling for refining the programs, not just slashing them. Also, that call for regularization, giving legal status to undocumented workers, comes up again and again. And a renewed focus on integrating newcomers through permanent residency. Because that's the key, right? Permanent status is what unlocks access to rights, protections, and helps prevent that exploitation cycle we talked about.
Well, okay. We have definitely covered a lot of ground today. From those loud political calls about wage suppression to the really difficult human cost of exploitation. Then the undeniable economic roles these workers and students play and how it all ties into the housing mess. It's just crystal clear there are no easy, simple answers here for Canada. You've heard the different takes, the push to scrap programs, the debates over wages, the harsh realities of exploitation, and the vital economic side too. This isn't just about policy papers. It really touches our economy, our ethics, how we see ourselves as a society.
And ultimately, it leaves a pretty big question for you, the listener, to think about. As Canada tries to find its way through these economic and social hurdles, how do we as a country find the right balance? That balance between our undeniable need for labor and our core values of fairness and basic dignity for everyone working here, no matter where they came from or what their status is.